an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Vorkosigan Saga, Book 3. The Warrior's Apprentice. I almost just called it Miles Vorkosigan. The Warrior's Apprentice, chapters 19 through the Epilogue. This is the end of the book. In these chapters, the end came too fast. I wanted to keep reading this book. I just hope that, future books are as fun. I had such a good time. I really did. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Jen for commissioning this episode. Jen, if you're out there, appreciate you. Are you here, Jen, today? Yeah, Jen's right here. What's up, Jen? Jen's the East Coast girl. Y'all, this is such a fun book. It's wild how fun it is considering how, dark some of the subject matter is, and it's not exactly like that subject matter is front and center to the plot. A lot of it is stuff that happened in other books. So I think that's what sort of helps to soften it a little bit. And we've got genuine tragedy and horrible injuries. And, there's plenty of stuff in here that I would think might make it less fun. But no, it makes it more fun because it feels like there are genuine stakes to the whole thing. And that just creates this tension that's very exciting so that the victories are even more satisfying. And I know I keep saying this, but competence porn, that's what this feels like a lot of the time. So there's so many things that I was thinking, because I only listened to this series of chapters once, because I have been catching up on so many recordings that I haven't had the downtime that I normally do. But I often will wrap an episode and then look back and be like, I cannot believe that I didn't talk about XYZ. And I am really worried that I am going to have that happen this time around. I should start really doing a little bit more with note taking and stuff and see if that helps or if I just find it distracting. But there is a lot to talk about here. So that's why I'm sort of concerned. And y'all know that I have just been going over on every recording, and I can't keep doing that, you guys. I just can't. I can't. It's just too long. So Jeff says, meet me in the spoilers to rank our faves. Yeah, there's a spoiler channel on the old Discord, guys. So, Jeff says the next book is literally one of my favorite books. Awesome. Great to hear that. Jen says, I've read them so many times over the years that I've had different favorites. I really like when that happens. That's a good sign as well, which means that there's not one that's a complete standout, all right. So, Chapter 19. This starts off with Miles giving his blessing for Elena and Baz to get married. In a truly heartwarming scene, not just because of how happy they are, but because Miles deciding that he is going to set aside his own personal feelings, his dreams of what a relationship with Elena could be like, and just do something because he cares about her happiness. This is hero shit, okay? This is the sort of thing that moments like this really make me sit back and be like, this was written by a woman. It really, there's a feeling here of, yeah, he likes her. And sometimes that just doesn't go your way. At least not initially. You know, who knows what happens? Maybe something happens to Baz and they meet up and we have another 10-year time jump or something. And now she's a widow and there's a whole second chance. I don't know. But I really like the fact that she isn't a prize for him at the end of the book, and that she wants something really different than what she could possibly get staying where she is. And I love the fact that the reasoning that she gives about why she can't be with him is so there. It's like the kind of thing that I feel like if you hadn't really gotten to know Miles throughout this book, it would sound like a load of shit, or it would sound like a weird kind of like paranoia thing. And instead, having read this, I'm like, she's right. You know, the idea that he is such a force of nature that he would completely subsume her life, whether he meant to or not. It's not even like about that. I really find that compelling because we just, you know, in the previous two books saw his parents and the way that they are both these forces of nature and they even each other out, or not even each other out, but just like they are able to withstand one another. And I believe that Elena could get to the point where she is able to withstand a personality like Miles's. But at this time, she doesn't have enough life experience and hasn't been allowed to do enough. And she should go out into the world and see what's what and experience things. It's odd because like Miles also hasn't gotten to do a lot due to his disability and also being simply sheltered as like somebody who is very high up on the social hierarchy. But being a man, there is just a different set of rules for him. And, you know, we've seen the way that he has described traveling to Beta Colony and just the variety of things that he has gotten up to on his own. So I don't feel like it's impossible that the two of them eventually do wind up together, but I am not worried about it. I don't feel like it's necessary. And I feel like this whole thing is as like, well, what's the word I want? I feel like the attitudes that they both have about it are as healthy as they can be considering this whole situation. Oh my God. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just seeing in the chats. Kate says that they can't access all the threads on the Discord. And sometimes if you're a patron, you have to unhook your Patreon and rehook it up. But if that's not working, message me on Discord, or you can message Alex, Irwin, or Candace, and we will figure it out. But oftentimes the Patreon thing is the issue. So this scene where Miles is giving his blessing, I absolutely died over this whole thing. This, I am tempted to say this is the sort of thing that I would do. And that isn't exactly accurate because I wouldn't be able to like make this kind of fun performance on behalf of a friend when I am heartbroken. This is more than I personally could manage. So amazing backbone from Miles and ability to set his own emotions aside. That is just, like I said, that is king shit. But the overall like complete lack of embarrassment and how he performs both of these roles, both, you know, as the commander and also the Baba, and jumps back and forth. Like, this is the exact sort of shit I used to do when I was in school for performing. And I like kind of also still do a little bit with my job. And the fact that he is able to throw himself into this and diffuse the tension by making it such a funny experience, and also kind of buy himself a little time, is the way I see it. You know, he is doing this because he knows it's the right thing to do. And he also has to distract himself from looking very hard at what it is that he's doing. I swear to God, I love this because it's such a beautiful example of using humor to get past something difficult. And this is my entire MO in life, sometimes to my detriment, you know? Oh, I like that. Emhan says Miles basically grew up getting used to dealing with pain. He just transferred that mental durability to endure emotional agony too. I like that interpretation a lot. So this whole scene is like, it culminates in, when are you guys getting married? And them saying, we don't know. And he says, well, maybe you should do it today or tomorrow. He says tonight. That's what it is. Because he's going to be leaving. And Baz gets very upset. And Miles, he sort of fibs here and makes it seem as if he's just leaving for a while. That he's not really going anywhere. So don't worry about it. I'll be back. He doesn't go so far as to actually say that. But he lets Baz believe it. And it was like the kind of thing for me where I understood why he was handling it this way. I think for the moment it was the right thing to do. And I have faith that Miles shall be back. But at the moment of like reading how much everybody has grown to care about Miles and depend on him in so many ways, I just didn't want them to have this sort of false hope while they're being abandoned. And I felt bad for them about it. So he assigns Baz as commanding officer and Elena as executive officer and apprentice. Commodore Tung will be your chief of staff. You understand that, Baz. I'm going to charge you and Tung jointly with her training, and I expect it to be the best. And Baz tries to protest, and he's just like, no, you're going to do this, and it'll be great. And this little section ends with, when the time came to leap in faith, whether you had your eyes open or closed or screamed all the way down or not, made no practical difference. I really do like that because I think sometimes we have this idea that in order to be like mature about something, it requires a kind of stoicism, you know, a grim determination. Why? No, it doesn't. It's very much giving for me the idea of like, in Bob's Burgers when he's like, fine, I'll come, but I'm going to complain the whole time. Sometimes that's just what you got to do. You're just going to do it and you're going to have kind of a bad attitude, but you're going to fucking do it. And that's as much as, you know, we can muster. It's fine. So he takes off here and he comes across, Trainee Visconti is what we're calling her, Elena's mother. And they have a really compelling conversation. So first she's just like completely cuts him off with, if you're going to ask what I think you're going to ask, just save your breath. I am absolutely unable to just go and interact with her like she's a person. And he essentially is like, look, I get that this is fucked up, but I am in a position where I don't feel like I can simply ignore this and not ask it of you. And she says that she's been trying to get over everything that happened to her for a couple of decades. And why does she like have to be put through it again? And he replies that he's leaving and, you know, all of you guys are going to be dropped off. So I assume you're going home, right? And she says, yes. And I also need to pick up my paycheck. And he's like, yeah, I think I also owe you a little bit. But I didn't want to leave Elena up in the air. She ought to at least have something to replace what was taken from her. Some little crumb of comfort. Well, she replies, the only thing she lost was some illusion. And I can't disagree with that. It's not entirely fair it's not the whole story, but also that is accurate, you know? The only thing I could give her would be another illusion. Maybe if she didn't look so much like him. Anyway, I don't want her following me around or showing up at my door. And does the whole, it's not her fault. And she's like, I am not saying it's her fault. I am simply saying I can't do it. And then she says, for me, she radiates nightmares. That is a hell of a sentence. And I feel like it's really well put, because it's so easy to just be like, this person isn't responsible for the thing. But just the fact that she looks like Bothari, it's not a reaction that you can fully control. This is the kind of thing that for me, if you try and push past it, act as if it doesn't bother you, or that you can stop seeing someone else's face when you look at her, maybe you will get to a point where you don't see his face anymore. But also maybe that is outside of your control, and it will be painful for her to watch you flinch every time you look at her. And that's not your fault either. It's simply a fact about the way that you both approach everything and see the world, and the memories and baggage that you have. And, sometimes the reactions that we have to things aren't anybody's fault, or they are a sort of mindset's fault that was carried over into you by numerous people. And last night, Owen and I were just talking about how each of us is really struggling with, getting moving and eating well, and managing to push through even when we have our depression, and trying to take care of ourselves when the going gets rough, because we know intellectually that's when we need to do it the most, but it's when we feel the capacity to do it the least. And it was an interesting conversation, because we each have such a different history with eating and with our relationships with food and exercise and diet, that, I had pointed out to him one morning. He got up and he's going to make himself something to eat for breakfast, but it was going to take some time to cook. So while he waited, he grabbed an ice cream out of the freezer and was just going to eat ice cream at 9 a.m. as a placeholder before his actual breakfast, which for me is insane. And I came in and I was like, are you really eating that at this hour? Just while you wait? And when we talked about it last night, he was like, well, I wouldn't ever say that to you. And I was like, I know you wouldn't, because I've struggled with eating disorders my entire life. And that would be just really triggering for me. But you don't have that kind of history. So I said it because I got the impression you didn't even really think about what you were doing. And once I said that, and I was like, I was just trying to draw your attention to the choice you were making, he sort of stopped and he was like, yeah, I guess you're right. I didn't really think about it. I just wanted something that was fast and ready. And I just didn't really stop and consider what time it was and how much it was going to make me feel like shit. So the ways that we all approach things, it's you can say that one thing is the way to say it, but depending on whatever history you have, you can't approach stuff the same with everybody. And this relationship, it's not even a relationship. That's too strong a word. It implies there is one, but I just don't blame her at all for how she's feeling. And I don't blame Elena for wanting somebody in her life if she does. But unfortunately, we don't get the kinds of closure we maybe deserve all the time, So I just, the whole, it's just so complicated, and it's so emotional, and it deals in a lot of irrational reaction or extremely rational reaction, depending on the way you want to look at it. And it ends with Miles asking her to give him a lock of her hair for a death offering. He makes some real missteps here. Like, at one point he says that he tells her about how Bothari used to fantasize about them being married and tell her stories. And she has to actually stop and swallow and lean against the wall like she's feeling as if she's going to throw up or faint. And she says, "I'm sorry, but the very thought that he was pawing over me in his twisted imagination all these years makes me ill." And Miles starts to say he was never an easy person, and then he just stops. And I was like, thank you, because you don't get to put yourself in the position of advising her when you have no idea what happened. Like, I have a suspicion Miles isn't even able to conceive of how horrible what happened to Elena actually is. Elena, the mother, not the daughter. I just don't think that... I think that it can be like she was raped by Bothari. I don't think the extent of the torture and how long the rape went on, because like he also sort of... Bothari took custody of her for a while. Miles doesn't know those details, and so I just don't think he fully grasps the intensity of the nightmare she went through. And I couldn't believe that he even said that to her. It just was such a bad call on, like, it's remarkable considering how good Miles is at understanding people at a lot of the time when it comes to strategic moves and the navigation of hierarchy and class distinction and command and motivation and working together as a group. All of that stuff, he is just great. And then these moments, he says shit that I'm like, what is wrong with you, dude? Are you fucking serious? Like, it's like when he was talking to Elena in the other scene and he basically said women shouldn't be in combat in front of her. And I was like, hello, are you, what are you doing? You know, he just really, when it comes to like emotional sensitivity, especially regarding someone else's experience versus what he needs from them, he isn't awesome. He's good at getting what he needs out of people. And when that isn't the goal of the conversation, he kind of fucks up a lot. So anyway, she agrees to give him a lock of hair. He frames it as like, sometimes you burn it for friends or relatives, sometimes for the souls of slain enemies so they don't come back to haunt you. And when he says it like that, that sort of she takes a moment and is like, huh, okay, I maybe I could do that. And she says some local superstition, and he says, superstition, custom. I've always thought of myself as agnostic. It's only lately that I've come to need for men to have souls. I love that. It's not him saying, I believe in it now. It is, this is something that I need to be true. And that's like a very fine distinction, but I think it's being more honest about what has changed his mind. So eventually, he says, I'll make a proper offering, my word on it. As I have given you my word, I'll bother you no more. And as he walks away, she says, you are mistaken, little man. I believe you're going to bother me for a long time yet. So then we go to Artie Mayhew. And this is a delightful thing. He is trying to find a situation to leave Artie in that isn't like miserable and resigning Artie to this. I'm trying to think of the way to say this, to feeling of like constant regret and missing out and having to almost give up. And what he comes up with is, maybe you could stay on with the mercenaries and salvage Necklin rods from some other ships and repair it. I could lease the ship back, or the guy who wanted to buy it, he would lease the ship from you. You wouldn't make as much money. But Mayhew really gets boosted by this. And it's also the fact that, as Miles puts it, it's a quest, which I really believe that this sort of thing is what carries us through sometimes. Is like, it's simultaneously really awful in some ways with life, because it's like a series of emergencies over and over again, you know? But there's also a part of me that is like, getting through each of those emergencies or challenges is what keeps us pushing forward. And if we didn't have that, I think a lot of us would just sort of like, we would tread water and get lazier and lazier about even treading water until we just sort of let ourselves drown. And I'm not trying to say that all challenge is a positive, because God knows there are plenty of emergencies and terrible situations that are just bad, and there isn't a silver lining. And I really believe that. People try and act like there's always, no, there's not. There's not always there's just not. Stop it. Be okay with that, please. Please just face the fact that sometimes a thing is just awful, and that is all there is to it. However, ooh, did you guys see that? I lost power for a second. There it goes again. Uh-oh. This happened last night as well. And I have the computer plugged into a backup battery. So, and also the Wi-Fi signal. But it always just like kind of freaks me out when that happens. But anyway, okay. So I gotta not get lost in the weeds here. Then he goes down to the docking bay. This is ridiculous. That's like, what, number 3 now? Jesus. And it's after the wedding. We don't actually see this take place. I was genuinely, again, surprised by the fact that this isn't a scene that we actually watch, so to speak, as readers, because we didn't get to see Cordelia and Errol's wedding either. And it's clear those sorts of plot beats are not as important for this author. And I'm fine with that ultimately, but I just keep having an expectation, and then it just doesn't happen. And I'm like, oh, okay. So when it turns out the wedding's happened already, I was genuinely a little wrong-footed for a moment. And he meets up with Ivan, who is getting along very well with Captain Austin. And he says, where did you disappear to? Like, we started drinking without you. And Miles says, well, I wanted to join you, but I had a lot of last minute things I had to work out with Commodore Tongue. And then Ivan makes this nasty joke about bringing a girl along on their trip that's going to give him nightmares. And it's the poor woman, Ellie, who lost her face in this battle. And this whole the situation with her and how this goes down is just unbelievable, because this bitch doesn't have a face. Her eyes are fucked up so like she could hardly see. She can hear like through one ear. I say she can hardly see. I don't think she can see at all. And yet, when they run into somebody a little bit later, she takes this man out with barely it's like, I am imagining, if you can't see, that this fighting would be difficult, or at least that you're going to be at such a disadvantage you might not be aware that you need to fight. And it's like she has a sixth sense or something and manages to handled this dude. And not only that, but then later he's willing to pay top of the line surgery and get her face back for her, as well as leaves her with like the little money he wound up with as a performance bonus for the way that she handled that situation. This woman is such a fucking bamf. I can't even comprehend it. And I'm really hoping that she somehow winds up being like a new bodyguard for him or something. Or perhaps a love interest even. I want her to like be around. I do not want this to be the last we see of her. And I really hope that I am not disappointed in that. So, Tongue's surgeon took Miles aside for last-minute instructions for her care during the journey and some acerbic advice on Miles' treatment of his own still-healing stomach. And Miles has this antacid that he is meant to drink every couple of hours. And I was not entirely sure if this was something that was meant to be like, from now on, this is how you have to live, or if it was just the healing process. I assume it's just the healing process. But later on, we find out that like he doesn't get the sort of like queasiness from the jumps that he used to, due to the fact that his stomach is not like a human stomach anymore, which is a really nice advantage after being so afraid that you're going to shame yourself by vomiting in front of everybody, that now you don't even have to like consider that. Awesome. Oh, guys, I'm sorry, folks. Some people in the chat are saying that they lost audio again, but all things on my end still look okay. So, I'm just going to keep going. Sorry, folks. You may want to refresh. So, let's see. Where are we going? Let's get out of here before the Bon Voyage committee wakes up and delays us another 2 hours. But he was too late. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a willowy form sprinting across the docking bay. Baz followed at a saner pace. Miles, you were going to leave without saying goodbye. Foiled again. Her cheeks were flushed, and her eyes sparkled from the exertion. Altogether desirable. He had hardened his heart for this parting. Why did it hurt worse? So we have the goodbye that is honestly sort of, it's like he doesn't get what it is that she's saying, because she says, thank you for a gift I never expected to possess. And he thinks, well, maybe she means Baz or the promotion, escape. And she says, myself. It seemed to him there was a fallacy in her reasoning somewhere, but there was no time to unravel it. I don't think there is, Miles. I get what you mean in that you can't give her herself, but you can give her the opportunity to be herself when she had never been allowed to be herself before, and that's just how suffocated she was by her father. I have to say, I will miss Bothari in my way, but I am glad he is out of her life. So Elena picks him up, hugs him. By the time she put him down, the crowd was gathering, hands reaching to shake his hand, touch him, just reaching. Bothari would have had a spasm. So eventually, they start cheering his name, and he's like cursing and just like, ugh, I knew somebody was going to start this shit. But now he has to come up with a speech. As you can see, I am high because you all have raised me up, he began, pitching his voice to carry it to the last and least. You have raised me up on your courage, tenacity, obedience, and other soldierly virtues. Although, surely, he owed as much to their confusion, bad-tempered rivalry, greed, ambition, indolence, and gullibility. I can do no less than to raise you up in return. I hereby revoke your provisional status and declare you a permanent arm of the Dendari mercenaries. The cheering, whistling, and foot-stomping shook the docking bay. Many were Oser's latecomers, curious along for the ride, but practically all of Austin's original crew were there. He picked out Austin himself, beaming, and Thorn, tears streaming down cheeks. M. Hun is in the chat saying, I think it's because he's always seen her as amazing and always seen her potential, and he didn't quite realize that she didn't see it too. I think also, it's sort of surprising to me because he has been so restrained by his disability that I don't think he fully grasps that she can be completely able-bodied and still be restrained in a way that feels very similar. It's surprising sometimes that it doesn't seem he has made that connection, but I really don't think he has. And I think you're right, it's just seeing her potential, but also because he had such a good relationship with Bothari, I think he sometimes underestimated the complete control he exerted over Elena's life and kind of gave him the benefit of the doubt in a way that Bothari didn't necessarily deserve. And that is something that I think happens when you know somebody in a different context. It's difficult to believe how they act in a totally separate situation. So I think that he has been sort of under the assumption, like, of course someday you'll get to do these things. That was never a guarantee at all. And I don't know if that could have happened if Bothari were still alive. It's like he's taking it for granted that eventually she would get her opportunity. And I am kind of thinking that he was wrong about that. Jessic says, for my curiosity, before you go, may I be permitted to know what house I serve? And Miles is genuinely surprised. He thought this dude had figured it out. And he says, I'm not going to shout it out in this crowd, but if you ever go shopping for livery, which doesn't seem too bloody likely, choose brown and silver. But Baz ground to a halt there in the crowd, a little knot of personal silence. But Miles smiled, wickedly gratified. Bring him in gently, Elena. I loved it. I'm very glad that Baz gets to find out. And I am very curious whether we're going to see all of them again. I hope we do. Then he and Ivan they're not exactly alone, but they are having a one-on-one conversation. And Ivan is assuming you've got to be flying high. And Miles says not really. Why not? I sure would be. My name isn't Naismith. Ivan opened his mouth, closed it, studied him sideways. Damn, it still knocks me flat. I mean, here you come into this place with nothing, and in 4 months you turn their war completely around and end up with all the marbles on top of it. I don't want all the marbles. I don't want any of the marbles. It's death for me to be caught with the marbles in my possession, remember? I don't understand you. I thought you always wanted to be a soldier. Here you fought real battles, commanded a whole fleet of ships, wiped the tactical map with fantastically few losses. Is that what you think, that I've been playing soldier? And then he says, maybe I did. Maybe that was the trouble, wasting day after day feeding my ego, while all the time back home, Vordrosa's pack of dogs were running my father to ground. So that's what's got the hair up on you. We'll get back all right. What are we going to do when we get back? And he says, I'll figure something out. And he thinks to himself, you're mistaken about the losses. They were enormous. So that's the end of chapter 19. And then chapter 20. They are first having to deal with going through customs, finding his grandmother, setting things up. The whole thing is just, I really like that all of these details are something that we have to go through with them. And he runs into Tav Calhoun, and they end up having to just tie this guy up and leave him in a broom closet, like in the most literal sense. This whole thing is so great. Calhoun twisted away from Ivan's clutch. His reflexes were quicker than Miles had expected for so beefy a body. Ellie Quinn, head cocked to one side, slid into his path in 2 smooth sideways steps, her ankles and knees flexing. Her hands found his shirt. They whirled for a dizzy instant like a pair of dancers, and suddenly Calhoun was doing spectacular cartwheels. He landed flat on his back on the pavement of the foyer. The air went out of him in a booming whoosh. Ellie, sitting, spun around, clamped one leg across his neck, and put his arm in a lock. Ivan, now that his target was no longer moving, took over and achieved a creditable come-along hold. "How did you do that?" he asked Ellie, astonishment and admiration in his voice. She shrugged. "Used to practice with eyes covered," she mumbled, "to sharpen balance. It works." Amazing. Amazing. So Calhoun's just yelling, "Assault! Battery!" Can you imagine if you were like walking by and somebody was just yelling battery? You wouldn't look over. You wouldn't like... Calhoun, you are a joke, sir. You are a fucking clown. But Miles still pays him what he owes. 39,000, 40,000 plus 10%. Miles gagged him again and counted out another $4,000. The valise was much lighter now. They locked the closet behind them. So this is when he comes to see his grandmother and is just like, everybody has been worried. Everybody is like wondering where the fuck you are. And she says about like Bothari, and I thought this was a very nice diplomatic way to say this. "I confess, I never did understand what your mother saw in the man, but I know he will be sadly missed." And I think that's a really well-phrased sentence. And it's something that I'm going to keep in mind, that like sometimes if there is a person that I didn't particularly care for, I can frame it like that, you know, and acknowledge like that's still telling the truth, but it's not you pretending to care about a person that you didn't, because I don't like doing that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with pretending. I get why people do it, but it takes too much energy for me. I would rather not. So she says, "According to your mother, you're scheduled to be challenged in the Council of Counts on some sort of trumped up treason charge." And apparently there's behind the scenes maneuvering, and they are changing the charge to you trying to usurp the throne. And I very quickly saw what was going on, and so does Miles. His father is described as goading them into increasing the charge. And it's the same thing that can happen in like a murder trial, where if you try to go for murder 1, it's a lot less likely you're going to convict. And so a lot of people will drop it to second degree or manslaughter to get any sort of conviction at all, even though those charges aren't really appropriate to what happened. And so here we have the opposite of like, we're going to try and get them to try you on a much more major charge. And it will be very unlikely you get convicted, because that is just not what happened. So we jump then ahead of in time, because he stays with his grandmother for a little while, and he has to, like I said, use up most of his money immediately to pay for her face, to give her the bonus. And Ivan, when he sees it first before he gives the money to Ellie, Ivan makes a comment about how, like, you're the first Vorkosigan to make a profit in 5 generations. And Miles says, my father gave away 275,000 marks the day before he left the Regency, just so he would have the exact financial balance as the day he took it up 16 years earlier. I never knew that. Why do you think Vorkosigan House didn't get a new roof last year? I think that was the only thing Mother regretted, the roof. Otherwise, it was kind of fun figuring out where to bury the stuff. The Imperial Service Orphanage picked up a packet. And the idea of just like needing to get rid of money and giving it away is literally a dream. Like, I fantasize about this sort of situation all the time. And it's what makes me crazy about people who have extraordinary wealth. And they could do this and it wouldn't affect their income in any way. They would still be able to live as insanely lavishly as they do. And they don't. For what reason? Why would you not? Are you serious? Ugh. Anytime that I hear about like some, you know, like good soul who goes around and pays off everybody's, like, what do you call them? Layaway items around the holidays. Or there was something I saw somewhere years ago when I was a kid of a person who was handing out like packages wrapped in wrapping paper with bows on them, and people opened them and they were literally just full of cash. And they did this at just a park where a lot of low income people were. That's life changing. I can only dream. I would love to be able to do something like that. So yeah, he goes back, gives her the money, kisses her hand, and then chapter 21, they are arriving at Vorhartung Castle. And it's very funny because he gets set up with this perfect line of just, well, if he isn't guilty, then where is he? And Ivan rightfully is like, you are not going to get a better line than that. You have absolutely got to walk in right now. This whole bit too of the guards not recognizing him, like one of them, he starts to be like, oh, get the fuck out of here, when Miles says I'm Lord Vorkosigan, and the other person has to be like, no, that's him, dude. It reminded me of Arya Stark trying to tell the guards and them not believing her. Formal liveries in a wild assortment of hues peeked out beneath their scarlet and silver robes of office, but for a sprinkling of robeless men who wore the red and blue parade uniform of active military service. Emperor Gregor, on his raised dais to the left of the room, also wore Imperial service uniform. Miles gulped down a sharp spasm of stage fright. He wished he'd stopped at Vorkosigan House to change. He still wore the plain dark shirt, trousers, and boots he'd stood in when leaving Tau Verde. He estimated the distance to the center of the chamber as about a light year. So he comes in, his father looks so relieved, but really like manages to keep it all in check. And as Vordrozda is saying, like, you know, why is he not here? He says, that's the question I propose to make you answer. Count Vorkosigan snapped his head around, saw Miles, inhaled. When did he grow to look so old? Miles grieved. Was his hair always that gray? Has he changed so much, or is it me? Or both? This is really the, like, of course it depends on how old your parents were when they had you, but this age is when you start to see that your parents age, and it's a real shock to suddenly feel like they look unfamiliar to you, you know, and it gives you a sense of their mortality that is just unwelcome. And I remember a moment like this when I was younger and like looking at my father and suddenly being like, oh God, you know. Also, probably you vanishing maybe gave him a few extra gray hairs. That's all I'm saying. Ivan, you idiot, where have you been? Vordrozda turned in the circle to glare furiously at Hessman, who was goggling at Ivan. You! Vordrozda hissed at the admiral, voice venomous with rage. He caught himself up almost instantly, straightening his crouch, relaxing his hands from clawed rakes to elegant curves once again. Yeah, bud, you really... Come on now. That was a real lack of control that exposed everything, low-key, and I'm embarrassed for you. That was just... You just handled that really badly. So, Gregor is watching him, and Miles is like, all right, I can't give them any time. If I even give them 30 seconds, they're going to put together a new lie. I have got to push immediately and keep them from being able to get their feet back under them. I challenge Admiral Hessman on charges of sabotage, murder, and attempted murder. I can prove he ordered the sabotage of Captain Demir's Imperial Fast Courier, resulting in the horrible deaths of all aboard her. I can prove his intent that my cousin Ivan had been among them. You are out of order. These charges do not belong in the Council of Counts. You must make them in a military court, where Admiral Hessman most conveniently must stand them alone, since you, Count Vordrozda, cannot be tried there. Count Vorkosigan was tapping his fist softly on his desk, leaning forward urgently toward Miles. His lips formed a silent litany. Yes, go, go. Miles, encouraged, raised his voice. He will stand alone, and he will die alone, since he has only his own unwitnessed word that his crimes were by your order. They were unwitnessed, were they not, Admiral? Do you really think that Count Vordrozda will be so overcome by emotions of loyalty to a comrade as to endorse that word? Hessman was dead white, breathing heavily. Miles could see the panic blossoming. My lords, this is not a defense. He merely hopes to camouflage his guilt. I appeal to you to restore order. So the Lord Guardian starts to stand up. Vorkosigan gives him a look, and he immediately sits down, and he just sort of goes, well, this is very irregular. And that's like the most he can make himself say. So Miles pushes again. You haven't answered my question. Will you speak for Admiral Hessman? Subordinates have committed unauthorized excesses through history. Oh, you admit he is your subordinate, do you now? He's nothing of the sort. We have no connection, but common interest in the good of the Imperium. No connection, Admiral Hessman. Do you hear that? How does it feel to be stabbed in the back with such surpassing smoothness? I wager you can scarcely feel the knife going in. It will be like that right up until the end, you know. No, it won't. You started this, Vordrozda. If I'm going down, I'll take you with me. He came to me at Winterfair, wanting me to pass him in the latest Imperial security intelligence about Vorkosigan's son. Shut up! Shut up! Vordrozda pulls out a needler, and Miles just kind of whispers to himself, oh, shit, you done it now. Because he pulls out a weapon in the presence of the Emperor, and everybody immediately flies into action. And I am just delighted at how easy this was. And I say easy, Miles makes it look easy because he has a very carefully constructed argument and trap already in place. Because he has the knowledge of how all of this works and doesn't miss much, as is said later. But it was just so very satisfying. So then we have a little break, and then Miles is before Gregor, who I'm interested to get to know Gregor a little bit, because he doesn't feel like an unreasonable person at all. It's, as he says later, he knows how wildly intelligent Miles is. And so he says that this was really the reason that he wasn't totally certain he could believe Miles wasn't working against him. Because he's like, look, dude, you're very good. Every time we used to play games together, you would outdo me. So it's not that I so much doubted your loyalty as I believed in your competence. And also, as the Count points out later, Gregor was led around by the nose a little bit. He's young. it's very easy for this to happen, you know? And especially if you are in the position where you think people are your friends. I understand that you shouldn't believe that when you are an emperor. Like, you have to know nobody's a friend. But when you're this young, you want somebody to be on your side without an agenda. And so, yeah, I really, really get it. So then we have to deal with Count Vorhalis. And he is the one who lost a son because of dueling. So that son was executed because Errol didn't feel like he could make an exception. This is one of those where I'm like, I think he probably was right, but I also wish that he had just made an exception. And then the other brother attacked them, and that was what resulted in the poisoning that caused Miles's disability. So this dude has a grudge doesn't even feel like an adequate word. Grudge always, for me, implies a little bit of pettiness. And honestly, losing both of your children, I can't call that petty. That's horrific, you know? His dislike, it's unfair to a degree, because Errol was doing what was really necessary. However, it's understandable, like profoundly understandable to me. So, this is when we find out that Captain Ilian is in prison awaiting trial, included on his charges. And when Miles says that's absurd, his father says, not at all. Most logical. Who, moving against me, would not take the precaution first of taking away my eyes and ears if they could? Count Vorhalis nodded a tactician's approval and agreement, as if to say, just how I'd have done it myself. There is something about how openly he opposes him that I really like. There's an honesty in that, you know? So, all who serve me serve you through me, Count Vorkosigan stated. It is the Vor system at work. And he does this flowery speech. And finally, Miles begins to tell the story. And Gregor is like, why were you trying to raise up this force if you were not going to force your way in to be emperor or like take over somewhere else? And Miles says, when we played together in the imperial residence, when did I ever demand any part except that of Vorthalia the Loyal? You know me. How could you doubt? The Dendari mercenaries were an accident. I didn't plan them. They just happened in the course of scrambling from crisis to crisis. I only wanted to serve Barriar as my father before me. When I couldn't serve Barriar, I wanted to serve something. He raised his eyes to his father's, driven to a painful honesty, to make my life an offering fit to lay at his feet. He shrugged. Screwed up again. Clay, boy. Count Vorkosigan's voice was hoarse, but clear. Only clay, not fit to receive so golden a sacrifice. For a moment, Miles forgot to care about his coming trial. He lidded his eyes and stored tranquility away in his heart's most secret recesses to pleasure him in some lean and desperate future hour. Fatherless Gregor swallowed and looked away as if ashamed. Count Vorhalis stared at the floor, discomfited, like a man accidentally intruding onto some private and delicate scene. So, you guys, this scene, I hate it, but also there's a part of me that kind of, it's not just that I understand it, there's a justice in it, you know? And this is how I felt about like Bothari being killed as well. So the usurpation charge does indeed appear false. And then he's like, but what about Vorupulus's law? No such charge, Count Vorkosigan said distantly, has been laid. Henry Vorvolk grinned. Who'd dare after this? A man of proven loyalty to the Imperium with an academic interest in perfect justice might so dare, said Count Vorkosigan, still dispassionate. A man with nothing to lose might dare. Much, might he not? Beg for it, Vorkosigan. Beg for mercy, as I did. His eyes shut tight, and he trembled. Count Vorkosigan gazed at him in silence for a long moment. Then, as you wish, he said, and rose and slid to one knee before his enemy. Let it lay, then, and I will see the boy does not trouble those waters any more. Still too stiff-necked. If it please you, then, say, I beg of you. I beg of you, repeated Count Vorkosigan obediently. Miles searched for tensions of rage in his father's backbone, found none. This was something old, older than himself between the two men, labyrinthine. He could scarcely penetrate its inward places. Gregor looked sick, Henry Vorvolk bewildered, Ivan terrified. Vorhalis' hard stillness seemed edged with a kind of ecstasy. He leaned close to Miles' father's ear. Shove it, Vorkosigan, he whispered. Count Vorkosigan's head bowed, and his hands clenched. He sees me, if at all, only as a handle on my father. Time to get his attention. Count Vorhalis, be satisfied, for if you carry this through, at some point you are going to have to look my mother in the eye and repeat that. Dare you? Can your mother look at you and not understand desire for vengeance? Mother calls it my great gift. Tests are a gift, she says, and great tests are a great gift. Of course, it's widely agreed my mother is a bit strange. What do you propose to do with your gift, Count Vorhalis? Hell, Vorhalis muttered. He's got his mother's eyes. I've noticed that. I am not a bloody saint. No one is asking you to be, said Gregor, anxiously soothing. But you are my sworn servant, and it does not serve me for my servants to be ripping up each other instead of my enemies. True, my liege. Oh, get up, he added impatiently to Count Vorkosigan. The former regent rose, quite bland again. And just how, Errol, do you propose to keep this gifted young maniac and his accidental army under control? And Gregor is like, maybe they could just go away. And Miles is like, that's sort of what I thought at first, but once I left, they are taking root and growing quite fast, actually. And Gregor's like, I can't just kill them all. And Miles immediately goes, no, please don't. And Gregor then says you couldn't break your blockade within its military context, so you changed the context. I cannot change Dorka's law. The Emperor's own Dendari mercenaries, Miles said suggestively. I'd be delighted to give them to you. Whatever he does with them will be a legal fiction anyway, since they are beyond his reach. He may as well arrange it to his own maximum convenience. Whose maximum convenience? Inquired Count Vorhalis dryly. You were thinking of this as a private declaration, I trust, said Count Vorkosigan. Well, yes. I'm afraid most of the mercenaries would be rather disturbed to hear they'd been drafted into the Barryaran Imperial Service. But why not put them in Captain Ilian's department? Their status would have to remain covert then. Let him figure something useful to do with them. A free mercenary fleet secretly owned by Barryaran Imperial Security. Gregor looked suddenly more reconciled, indeed intrigued. That might be practical. Simon will be overjoyed. Really? You may have my personal guarantee. And Vorhalis says, you're too bloody clever for your own good, you know, boy? Exactly, sir, said Miles agreeably. So, again, we come back to what do we do with this fucking kid? And they decide, I think we're going to put you back into your schooling. And there's a moment where it's like, you just were an admiral. I know that that was like a made up thing, but still, you technically were. Are you actually going to be able to stomach a demotion and taking orders again? And Miles says, I have a bionic stomach now. I can digest anything. So, that is what they do with him. This is wonderful. I love it so much. Some of Count Vorkosigan's older political opponents looked as if they'd rather spit, but only Count Vorhalis voted an abstention. Then, Vorhalis had never been of Vordrozda's party and had no taint of association to wash off. Ballsy bastard. I wish they all had his backbone, if not his opinions. So, we have Miles burying Bothari with his mother. And he does it by hand, even though there are other ways that would be like almost instantaneous. But he puts the work in and his hands begin to bleed. Because blood washes away sin, as he puts it, as his mother had put it. The speech that he gives to Bothari before he goes. I'm afraid I made a most improper Baba. I never meant to mock you, but Baz loves her. He'll take good care of her. My word was easy to give, too hard to keep. But there. He added flakes of aromatic bark. You shall lie warm here, watching the long lake change its faces, winter to spring, summer to fall. No armies march here, and even the deepest midnights aren't wholly dark. Surely God won't overlook you in such a spot as this. There will be grace and forgiveness enough, old dog, even for you. I pray you will spare me a drink from that cup when it overflows for you. That is poetry. That is absurd. Like, that... It's one of those things that I just want to, like, break it down into its component parts and look at each sentence and sentence fragment and be like, how did you do this? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, this is something that I just keep coming across in her writing. It's so succinct and there's no extraneous words, even though there's a floweriness to it. It's not in a way that it detracts. It's just enough. It's just disgusting. Why? My God. It's like, how? Anyway, okay. I'm over time as I always am. Let's go into the epilogue. I don't have like I'm over time, but he is back with Kostelitz, which is the fucking kid that he dealt with in the first place. And they are being put through another exercise. And what they have, like the way that this works, is that everybody gets these armbands that denote what they achieved in a drill. And if they had been, I'm trying to find, the armbands were rather like getting a gold star on your paper in reverse. Green represented injury in drills. Yellow represented death in the judgment of whatever instructor was umpiring the simulated catastrophe. Very few cadets managed to escape these training cycles without a collection of them. Miles had encountered Ivan Vorpatrol yesterday, sporting 2 greens and a yellow. Not as bad as the unfortunate fellow he'd seen at mess last night with 5 yellows. Miles' own undecorated sleeve was attracting a bit more attention from the instructors than he really wanted lately. The notoriety had a pleasant flip side. Some of the more alert among his few cadets vied quietly to have Miles in their group. Of course, the most alert were avoiding him like the plague, realizing he was beginning to draw fire. Miles grinned to himself in happy anticipation of something really sneaky and underhanded coming up. Every cell of his body seemed awake and singing. This is just delightful. He is being targeted not because of his disability, not because he is the Count's son, the Regent's son. He is being targeted because he's so good that the teachers are like, we have got to get this kid. I can't believe he still has. Did you see what he did with the lad? Don't worry. No, this time we're going to fucking get him this time. I love it that this is like a personal challenge, it feels like, to these instructors. He had the uncanny sensation of being able to look through Kostelitz the way a doctor saw through a body with his diagnostic viewers. Every twist and tear and emotional abrasion, every young cancer of resentment growing from them, seemed redlined in his mind's eye. Patience. The problem displayed itself with ever-increasing clarity. The solution would follow, in time, with opportunity. Kostelitz could teach him much. The docking drill might prove interesting after all. So, long story short, Miles is looking for a trap. And he's checking everything twice. There's like a first aid kit, and he's like, let's see if everything's actually in here. Yes, it is. Then he's like, is there a bomb planted? Nope. And then he notices that the instructor has a bulge in his breast pocket and decides to be like, oh, I'm so sorry. I lost my pen. Do you mind if I, just to get him to open it so he exposes what's in there. And this dude does it. Miles keeps being underestimated. So Miles spots these extra breath masks and is like, that's interesting. And he notes that Kostelitz had counted the masks, but that had not actually tested to see if they were functional. So he gives the pen back, and they begin their whole like drill, and then suddenly gas begins to pour in. And Kostelitz is trying for the masks because that's the logical first thing most people would do. Protect your breathing, get the masks. But Miles is aware the masks aren't going to work and does not waste time with that. And trusts that Kostelitz is going to figure it out. So he doesn't take time to explain. He's like, I'm just going to do my thing, and eventually he's going to catch on. So let's see, I'm trying to find. Miles levered open the first aid kit and pulled out IV tubing and 2 Y connectors. Kostelitz threw aside the third breath mask and began climbing back up the starboard wall toward the case of breath masks. The coolant gas made an acrid burning stench in Miles' nostrils, but its harmful concentrations remained in the other end of the cabin. Miles' lips drew back in a wicked grin. He pulled his grandfather's dagger, cut the IV tubing into 4 pieces, inserted the Y connectors, sealed them with blobs of plastic bandage, jammed the hookah-like apparatus into the single outlet of the emergency medical oxygen canister, and skidded back to the instructor. Air, sir? He offered a hissing end of IV tubing to the officer. I suggest you breathe in through your mouth and out through your nose. Thank you, Cadet Vorkosigan, said the instructor in a fascinated tone, taking it. Kostelitz, coughing, eyes rolling desperately, fell back toward them, barely managing not to put his feet through the control panel. Miles blandly handed him a tube. Can you imagine, you guys? Can you, you're just frantically, pawing through all the masks and trying them and choking and trying another one and choking. And this fucker is over here doing some shit. And then you're, about to pass out and he just hands you a tube. And it's just here. That is so humiliating. And yeah, it says that his eyes are watering, and Miles is like, I don't think that's the gas. And I'm like, I bet it's not. Jesus Christ. Clenching his air tube between his teeth, Miles began to climb the starboard wall. Kostelitz stared after him, then discovered that both he and the instructor had been issued short tethers. Miles uncoiled tubing behind him. Yes, it would reach, although just barely. Miles reversed his hold as he passed the midpoint of the cabin, and centrifugal force began to pull him toward the pooling green gas, slowly filling the shuttle from the back wall. So, he has to find manual shutoff valves and turn it off. The tide of green gas began to recede. Cadet Kostelitz, in his role as pilot, returned to his controls. The atmosphere cleared at last. He stopped the spin and aimed the damaged shuttle slowly back toward dock, paying strict and subdued attention to engine temperature readouts. The instructor looked extremely thoughtful and only a little pale. The chief instructor himself was waiting in the shuttle hatch corridor of the orbital station when they docked, along with a repairs tech. He smiled cheerily, turning 2 yellow armbands absently in his hands. Their own instructor sighed and shook his head dolefully at the armbands. No? Queried the chief instructor. Miles was not sure if it was amazement or disappointment. No. This I've got to see. The 2 instructors ducked into the shuttle, leaving Miles and Kostelitz alone a moment. So Kostelitz had been mocking Miles earlier for carrying a blade with him because it's old-fashioned. And here he's like, I guess it came in handy. And Miles is like, yeah, sometimes you don't want something that is fire to cut things, when there's flammable gas, for example. And Kostelitz is like, oh my God, and he stops, but clearly he was about to do something that would have killed all of them, and realizes it so belatedly. And I think that's the part that's probably the scariest, is he was just being like, oh, I guess that came in handy, not considering that this was the only way to do this that wouldn't result in their deaths. So realizing that, well, if I had known, I could have done, but then stepping back and being like, I couldn't have done. I didn't have the tool to do it with. That's very humbling. And he's like, did you see what happened, what they had set up in advance? And Miles is like, no, but I did see he had the extra masks in his pocket. And that's when Kostelitz is like, oh, so you asked for his pen. That's why. He scuffed around the corridor a moment, hunched, red, dismally recalcitrant. Now, thought Miles, I know a place you can buy good blades in Vorbar Sultana, he said with nicely calculated diffidence. Better than standard issue stuff. You can get a real bargain there sometimes if you know what to look for. Oh, yeah? I don't suppose. It's kind of a hole in the wall. I could take you there sometime during leave if you're interested. Really? You? Yes, I'd be interested. Kostelitz feigned a casual air. Sure. He looked suddenly much more cheerful. Miles smiled. End of book. It's so good, you guys. I loved this so much. It was just delightful. Beginning to end, I had such a great time. It's so nice to read things that are just a great time. There are things that are excellently written, gripping, but also a bummer, And the stuff that's just a bright spot of this is fun. It's very appreciated. I wouldn't want everything that I cover to be like that. I need the other stuff, But it just really is a nice break. So, okay. I am so over time, y'all. I have got to get out of here. I cannot believe how far over I went. And August 6th is the start of the Vor game, the next book. So, I'm pretty excited. I really, really am. All right, everybody. Thank you for hanging out with me in the chat. And thank you very much to Jen for commissioning this one. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
an Unspoiled Network podcast.